In my early 20s, I worked in construction and engineering around the Philadelphia area. Most of the time, my crew and I handled straightforward jobs, things like adding extensions to existing buildings or installing new foundations. We weren't building skyscrapers or anything flashy, just solid, functional work. Back in 2012, we got hired for a relatively simple job: build a small basement and extend the main floor of a corner building that housed both a coroner's office and a dentist. Odd combination, I know, and the place already had a strange energy to it, quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. The plan was basic enough. The basement would have a bathroom and 2 large storage rooms, nothing complicated. Just dig, pour, frame, and wire. At first, it was just like any other job. We made good progress quickly, and before long, we had working lights installed in the basement. It made things easier when we had to work after sunset, which we did often. By the time this particular part of the story takes place, we'd already sealed off the basement entrance. The gaping hole in the ground was gone, covered with reinforced flooring and a proper staircase leading down. With the electrical hooked up and lights working, the basement wasn't just some dark pit anymore. It was usable space. Still, even with those lights humming softly overhead, something about that place always felt a little off. We didn't talk about it, not yet, but the air was starting to change down there, and soon we'd realize how much. At one point during the shift, one of my coworkers, Jordan, headed upstairs, then stepped outside to assist with work on the external extension. That left me down in the basement, alone for a while, messing around with some of the electrical components we'd recently wired in. Now, to be clear, I'm no licensed electrician, but I knew enough to do basic troubleshooting, and I wasn't doing anything risky. Just checking a few lines and connections. Nothing that should have caused what happened next. Without warning, the power cut out. The basement was instantly swallowed by darkness, the kind that feels heavy, like the shadows are pressing in from all sides. My first instinct was to check the panel, but I already knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't from anything I'd done. It felt more like a local outage, a blackout maybe. We weren't connected to the main grid yet, but everything had been stable until that moment. None of us kept our phones on us while we worked. It just didn't make sense. They'd get filthy or broken within an hour. So we kept them in our jackets upstairs, tucked out of the way. Fortunately, one of the tools we did always carry was a flashlight, tucked into the chest pocket of our work vests. I instinctively reached for mine, ready to flick it on. But just before my fingers touched it, I froze. A sound echoed through the basement, faint but close. It stopped me cold. It was a rattling noise. Not loud, but distinct, like someone shaking a bag of coins in slow, deliberate motion. Metallic, irregular, unsettling. It wasn't quite coins, but that was the closest thing my brain could compare it to. A soft clinking and jittering, just enough to make the hair on my arms stand on end. It was coming from the small room just ahead of me, the one we were turning into the bathroom. A space that, as far as I knew, should have been empty. I held my breath, and the rattling continued. I reached into the pouch on my vest, fingers brushing over the familiar ridges of my flashlight. I pulled it out, clicked it on, and immediately aimed the beam toward the small bathroom section. We'd already installed a door there. It wasn't fully shut, just slightly ajar, hanging halfway closed and obscuring most of my view inside. The rattling sound had stopped now, but the silence that followed was even worse, thicker somehow, more deliberate. It didn't sound like any kind of normal construction noise. No creaking beams or shifting pipes. It wasn't the building settling. And something about the rhythm of that rattle, it felt intentional. For a moment, I tried to reason it away. Maybe it was one of the guys playing a prank, or maybe Jordan had come back in without me noticing. Still, my chest felt tight as I stepped toward the door. I raised my hand slowly, fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe. I hesitated for a breath, maybe two, just long enough to gather myself. The flashlight beam quivered slightly in my hand. Then I pulled the door open. The beam cut through the dark like a blade. And standing there, completely still, facing the far corner of the cramped little room, was a person. They were dressed entirely in black. Their back was to me. I couldn't see a face, only the shape of their head, slightly bowed, arms at their sides, unmoving. It was like they'd been placed there, positioned deliberately, just facing the corner. My mouth went dry. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stood frozen, my flashlight fixed on the figure. Then, they moved. Not fully, just the head. It turned sharply, like a deer snapping to attention at the sound of a twig breaking in the woods. The motion was stiff, unnatural, and in that single, jarring turn, the flashlight caught their face. Or rather, their eyes. Two glowing, reflective eyes stared back at me, not glowing from within, but catching the beam of light in a way that made them gleam, eerily bright, like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the door shut, the impact echoing through the basement like a thunderclap, and I bolted. My boots pounded up the staircase, every heavy step fueled by pure adrenaline. I burst through the door at the top, heart hammering, scanning for anyone. Outside, I needed to find someone. And there they were, my coworkers, all three of them, gathered outside near the construction gear, jackets on, looking like they were about ready to wrap things up. Apparently, the power had gone out in all the nearby buildings. They'd figured we'd call it for the night. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. All accounted for. None of them could have been the figure I saw in that room. Whoever or whatever was standing down there, it wasn't one of us. I turned to the guys, my pulse still racing, and asked the first question that came to mind, blurting it out faster than I meant to. Did anyone else who works in this building come by tonight? They looked at me, confused. All three of them shook their heads. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just a flat, unanimous no. No one, Jordan said. Why? My throat tightened. I didn't even try to explain right away. Words weren't going to cut it. You guys need to come downstairs with me, I said instead. Now. They gave me a few strange looks, but something in my voice must have told them I wasn't messing around. Without further questions, they followed me back through the building and down the basement stairs. Each step creaked under our boots, the air cooler and heavier the deeper we went. My flashlight beam danced along the unfinished walls, and even with them behind me, I couldn't shake the sense that I was leading them into something wrong. We reached the tiny bathroom. I paused in front of the door. Part of me already knew what we'd find, or wouldn't find. I opened it. Empty. The room was completely empty. No figure in black, no sound. Just a bare, quiet space with unpainted drywall and the smell of fresh concrete. We searched the rest of the basement just to be sure, but it was the same story everywhere. No one. Nothing. Not even a trace. I could feel their disbelief thick in the silence that followed. None of them said it outright, but I could read it on their faces. They thought I'd imagined it, that maybe the power outage or the darkness had messed with my head. I didn't blame them, really. I mean, how do you explain something like that? A person standing motionless in the dark, eyes gleaming back at you, and then just gone? Still, the embarrassment sat heavy in my chest. I could feel it sinking in, slow and cold, like a weight I couldn't shake. But I wasn't about to beg them to believe me. I wasn't going to force the issue. If they didn't see it, they didn't see it. We went back outside, the night colder than before, and silently began packing up the gear. Everyone was ready to leave. The power was out, the job was done for the day, and whatever I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was now just a shadow in my mind. I was the last one left, as usual. I was the one with the key to the building, the one who had to lock up. As the others drove off into the night, I turned to face the quiet, dark structure one last time. Then I shut the door and locked it behind me. After climbing into my car and watching the others drive off into the night, I sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. There was this strange, gnawing feeling deep in my gut, like an itch I couldn't reach. It crept in quietly at first, then swelled into something impossible to ignore. I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even fear. It was certainty. I knew what I saw, and I needed to be absolutely sure. So I took a long, shaky breath, stepped back out of my car, and walked up to the door again. The building loomed darker now, lifeless. I unlocked it, the key clicking louder than usual in the silence, and slipped inside alone. The power was still out, but this time I came prepared. I had two sources of light, the same flashlight I'd used earlier, and now my phone's flashlight as backup. I gripped both tightly. The air inside felt colder now, the silence thicker, like the entire building was holding its breath. I made my way to the basement door, pushed it open, and slowly started down the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my boots, echoing eerily in the emptiness. The further I descended, the more I felt it creeping in, that pressure in my chest, that voice in the back of my head screaming at me to turn around. I reached the bottom step and stopped. The silence was absolute. Not a single creak, no hum of electricity, just the sound of my own breathing, shaky, uneven, and the faint rustle of my jacket as I slowly turned, flashlights sweeping across the unfinished concrete. The basement hadn't changed, still raw, still uninviting, still wrong. I stood there, frozen, every muscle in my body tense. My eyes were fixed on the door to the tiny bathroom. I hadn't even moved toward it yet. That's when it happened. The rattling. The exact same sound as before. A jarring, metallic clinking, faint but unmistakable, like a bag of coins being shaken gently but deliberately, just enough to be heard through the quiet. It was coming from the same place, from inside that room. I didn't look. I couldn't. The second I heard it, my heart felt like it punched up into my throat. My hands went cold. My body reacted before my mind even caught up. I turned and bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, every step booming beneath me as I ran. When I reached the top, I slammed the basement door shut behind me and locked it tight without even thinking. I didn't stop. I locked the front door of the building, rushed back to my car, and drove. I didn't look back once. Thank God it was a Saturday. That meant I had all of Sunday before I had to return to the site. I needed that time to breathe, to let the fear settle into something manageable. After that night, I made a decision. I never worked alone in that basement again, ever. Fortunately, we wrapped up the job within a couple more weeks, and I never experienced anything like that again while we were there. Nothing else strange happened, but I still remember that sound, rattling from a room that should have been empty. And I never did find out who or what was standing in the corner that night. It was an ordinary night in the dead of February. Bitter cold, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones even when you're inside. My wife and I were tucked into bed, half buried under layers of blankets, watching some late-night movie to wind down before sleep. The glow from the screen cast flickering light across the room, the kind of cozy dimness that makes you feel safe, relaxed. We were both quiet, half focused on the movie, half dozing. Then, without warning, everything cut out. The TV went black. The room was swallowed in darkness. At the exact same moment, my wife and I let out twin groans of annoyance. Lamps, clocks, even the faint hum of the heater, all dead. The entire room had gone silent, unnaturally so. "Power's out," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. I tossed the covers back and climbed out of bed, already wincing at the cold air rushing against my skin. "I'll go check outside, see if the neighbors are out too." My wife mumbled something behind me, still wrapped in the cocoon of blankets. I headed to the front door and pulled it open. The icy February air slammed into me like a wall, sharp and unforgiving. I only stood on the stoop for a second or two, just long enough to glance around. Snow crunched underfoot, and my breath puffed out in visible clouds. Across the street, I saw porch lights glowing warmly, windows lit up, TVs flickering through curtains. The neighbors still had power. It was just us. A quiet unease started to stir in my gut, though I couldn't quite explain why. Our fuse box was in the basement, tucked away in a cramped little boiler-style room. It didn't make much sense. There hadn't been a surge, no weird noises, but I figured I had to check it out anyway. I didn't have a better idea. I shut the door behind me, sealing out the cold, and turned toward the basement. Something about that darkness felt heavier than it should have. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way toward the basement. The soft click of the beam breaking through the dark offered a small comfort, but only just. There's something a bit odd about the layout of our house. To get to the basement, you actually have to go down a flight of stairs before you even reach the door. The door itself sits flush at the bottom of the staircase, right on the basement level. It's never really made much sense architecturally, and at night it always gives off this narrow, sunken, boxed-in feeling, like descending into a space that wasn't meant to be opened often. I was exhausted and my body felt heavy, so I stomped lazily down the stairs, my boots echoing on the wood, the flashlight beam wobbling a little with each step. I didn't feel nervous, just annoyed and groggy. When I reached the bottom, I grabbed the cold metal doorknob and gave it a turn. It clicked. I gave the door a push. Nothing. It didn't move, not even an inch. I blinked and pushed harder, using my shoulder this time. Still no give. It was solid, stubborn in a way that immediately felt wrong. I let out a sigh. Locked. My first thought was that my wife must have locked it earlier without thinking. It wouldn't be the first time. So, grumbling under my breath, I trudged all the way back upstairs to ask her where she'd put the basement key. She was just getting comfortable again, half tucked under the covers when I walked in. She sat up with a soft groan and said, "I'll get it." I followed her back downstairs, the house dim and oddly quiet, except for the occasional creak beneath our feet. We headed into the kitchen, where our key hanger hung on the wall. Just a tangle of jingling metal shapes, most of which we hadn't used in years. She flipped through the keys absently, then stopped and plucked one off with a small clink. "Here," she said, handing it to me. Without another word, she turned and padded back upstairs, leaving me alone in the soft glow of the flashlight. I turned toward the staircase again, now holding the basement key tightly between my fingers, and made the familiar descent a second time. Once at the bottom, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I twisted it to the right. Click. I turned the doorknob, bracing myself this time, and pushed. Nothing. The door still wouldn't open. No resistance, no rattle, it just wouldn't move. My hand froze on the knob. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Frustrated, I climbed the stairs once more and called out to my wife. "Can you come down here for a second?" She heard something in my voice, something between irritation and confusion, and came down without asking questions. Her flashlight beam danced against the walls as she made her way to the stairs, already chuckling before she reached me. What, you need help opening a wooden door now? She teased, grinning. I gave her a look, half embarrassed. You're the only one who ever locks this thing. I swear, it wouldn't budge. She rolled her eyes playfully and stepped past me, her light casting long shadows up the wall as she reached the door. Without a hint of hesitation, she grabbed the knob, gave it one firm push, creak. The door swung open. Just like that. I blinked in disbelief, the flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. What? No way, I said, staring at the now open doorway. I'm telling you, it wouldn't open. She just smirked and patted my shoulder like I was a kid struggling with a stuck jar lid. Sure, she said, you loosened it up for me. I let out a laugh, though it came out more nervous than amused. She turned and headed back upstairs again, her footsteps fading as the sound of her flashlight tapping gently against her leg disappeared down the hall. Now alone, I turned back toward the open basement. The darkness inside felt still, heavier somehow, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I stepped through the doorway and flicked the light switch on the wall. Nothing. Still pitch black. The switch clicked back and forth under my thumb, but the room stayed swallowed in shadow. I let out a slow breath, raised my flashlight again, and began walking deeper in, the cold concrete floor creaking under each step. The boiler room was tucked in the far corner, cramped and lined with old pipes and rust-flecked metal panels. I ducked inside, the air immediately tighter, more suffocating. I knelt in front of the fuse box and opened its narrow door. My flashlight flickered against the mess of switches and labels, most of which were faded and hard to read. I didn't bother trying to figure out which one was which. I just started flipping everything, one by one. Click, click, click. Nothing. Still darkness. Then, click. A soft buzz. Then, a sudden pop of light. The basement lights flickered to life overhead, humming softly as they warmed up. Relief rushed over me, sudden and strong. The silence, the dark, the tension, they all loosened slightly. I exhaled, leaned back on my heels, and shut the small metal door on the fuse box with a quiet clang. The lights were on, but the basement still felt wrong. Just as I finished closing the fuse box door with a soft clang, a sound echoed through the basement. It was faint but unmistakable. The slow, dragging creak of one of the basement closet doors opening. My entire body stiffened. I paused, holding my breath, the boiler room suddenly feeling much smaller. The distant creaking sound lingered in the air, stretching out into silence. I stepped cautiously to the threshold and angled my flashlight through the doorway, sweeping the beam across the basement. Two closet doors stood on opposite sides of the wall just outside. One was shut tight. The other was slightly open, just a sliver, wide enough to see darkness inside, wide enough to make my skin crawl. I could feel my pulse quicken in my neck, the kind of thump you hear inside your own ears when everything around you is too quiet. With careful steps, I approached the partially open door. Not all the way, just close enough, maybe 2 feet away. I stood there, frozen, listening. There was no movement, no rustle, just silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was charged, heavy. That's when the thought hit me, sharp, sudden. Why had the power gone out in the first place? What could have flipped the switch inside our fuse box? You don't just accidentally shut off power like that, not without someone deliberately throwing it. And then another thought pushed its way to the surface, slow and sickening. What if the basement door had never been locked? What if it hadn't been stuck at all? What if, while I was trying to open it, someone on the other side was simply holding it shut? I stood frozen in front of that cracked closet door, heart hammering in my chest, every instinct screaming for me to move, to get away. Then I heard it. A deep, slow exhale. Not mine. It came from inside the closet. A low, heavy breath, unmistakably human. The kind of sound someone makes when they've been holding still for far too long and finally let go. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. Up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. My feet barely touched the steps, adrenaline carrying me faster than I thought possible. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and twisted the lock with shaking fingers, making sure it clicked tight. I'd never run like that before, not in my life. When I burst into the bedroom, I was practically yelling, gasping for air, my voice cracking as I tried to get words out. My wife sat up immediately, alarmed, her eyes wide. I wasn't acting like the man of the house anymore, not even close. I'll admit it, I was scared, too scared. But I knew what I heard. Still breathless, I managed to grab my phone and dial the police. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. Sometime after the call, but before the officers arrived, we heard it. Crash. The sound of glass shattering somewhere outside. We both jumped. I rushed to the bedroom window, squinting into the backyard. But it was too dark to see anything clearly, just shadows and the lingering silence after the break. When the police arrived, I wasted no time. I led them straight to the basement, my flashlight beam jittering across the walls as I pointed them toward the closet. But by then, it was open, completely open and empty. No figure, no breath, nothing. But the signs were there. One corner of the basement was littered with broken glass. The floor was scattered with objects, tools, boxes, storage bins, knocked over, displaced, disturbed. The officers and I scanned the room, and that's when we saw it. High on the wall above the ledge where we kept old collectibles, the window. It had been smashed out from the inside. Whoever had been hiding in that closet had climbed up, shattered the glass, and escaped through the tiny opening into the night. Gone. Whoever they were, they vanished before the police got there, and they were never caught. That night, we didn't sleep. We kept every light in the living room and basement on. We double-checked every lock in the house 3 times over. There was no relaxing, just waiting, listening. Every creak of the house made our hearts jump. The next morning, we had the window repaired, glass swept up, things put back in place, but something didn't feel fixed. We don't even live in a bad neighborhood. That's what makes it worse. There were no signs, no reason, no explanation. And that's the part that stuck with me ever since. If it could happen to us, it could happen to anyone. I work as a janitor at a commuter college campus. For privacy and safety reasons, I won't say exactly where. My job is straightforward. I clean hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms across different buildings scattered around campus. It's not glamorous work, but it's quiet and steady. Most days I work late shifts, usually from 1 in the afternoon until about 9 at night. That's when the place is winding down, less crowded, fewer people, fewer distractions. This happened on a stormy summer night. Now, the college does offer summer courses, obviously, so yes, I work year-round, even during the break months. But that particular evening, it wasn't just a typical summer storm. It was one of the worst we'd had that year. Relentless sheets of rain hammered the windows, and the wind howled like it was trying to peel the buildings apart. Power lines swayed dangerously, and trees bent in unnatural ways beneath the force of it all. It was late in my shift, probably sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock. I was cleaning in the activity center hall, a building that didn't host regular classes. Instead, it housed a large ballroom, a small theater, and a few multi-purpose rooms, spaces used for events, meetings, or general use. Because of that, it was usually one of the quietest places on campus, especially when nothing was scheduled. That night, it was practically silent. With the storm raging outside, the atmosphere inside the building felt insulated but eerie, the kind of stillness where even the hum of fluorescent lights feels loud. No students, no faculty, just me, the distant rumble of thunder, and the occasional buzz of my cleaning cart wheels on tile. I walked the darkened corridors, pushing my cart from room to room, occasionally glancing through rain-streaked windows at the chaos outside. As far as I could tell, I was the only person in that entire building. And maybe I was.
But even then, I had this strange, nagging feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. I was working in the downstairs section of the activity center at the time, near the game room, a quiet, tucked-away space that always felt a little too still when no one else was around. That's when it happened. Without warning, the entire building went dark, pitch black. Not just dim, total darkness. The overhead lights blinked out, the vending machines powered down, and the soft hum of ventilation ceased entirely. The only light left came from a single red exit sign near the stairwell door, a dim, ghostly glow barely cutting through the shadows. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and immediately called one of the other janitors I knew was working a different building across campus that night. The screen glowed faintly in the dark as it rang. He picked up after a few seconds. "Yeah, power just dropped over here too," he said. "It's probably the whole campus. Storm's messing everything up." I sighed, thanked him, and hung up. If the entire campus was down, then there wasn't much more I could do down there, especially in that darkness. I figured it was time to wrap things up and start making sure the building was clear before locking up. I turned toward the red glow of the exit sign and started walking slowly in its direction, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. My footsteps echoed strangely in the quiet, as if the walls were pressing in. Then I stopped cold. About halfway to the stairwell, just beyond the edge of the red glow, I saw it. A head, slowly peeking out from around the far side of the stairway wall. It was just a silhouette, no details, but it was unmistakably human. The shape of a face, the slight tilt of the head, just watching. My heart dropped. I let out a startled noise, half shout, half question. I instinctively called out, thinking maybe it was a staff member or a student who had stayed late. But before I could even finish the sentence, they vanished. In one swift, silent movement, the head disappeared up the stairs, out of sight. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Then instinct kicked in. If someone was still in the building, I needed to find them. I couldn't lock up with someone inside, especially in a blackout. I grabbed my flashlight, steadied my breathing, and rushed toward the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. Whoever that was, they were heading up, and I had to follow. To be honest, when I reached the top of the stairs, I wasn't sure what to do. The upper floor was just as dark as the basement, maybe darker. Only a few backup lights had kicked on. Old emergency fixtures, likely wired decades ago, barely functioning at all. They didn't flood the hallways with light. Instead, they gave off weak halos, illuminating only a small patch of floor and casting the rest into deep, shifting shadows. I stood there for a second, eyes straining against the dark, then began calling out into the silence. "Hello? This building's closing up. If anyone's still inside, you need to leave now." My voice echoed faintly across the empty corridor, bouncing back to me from the walls. The layout of the building made things trickier. The main hallway upstairs formed a wide loop around the central ballroom. It meant that someone could easily keep just ahead or just behind me without being seen. The backup lights were spaced far apart, offering only brief islands of visibility along the path.
Everything in between was shadow and silence. Still, I had a job to do, so I started my walk, moving slowly, methodically, checking doorways and corners as I went. My flashlight beams swayed across empty rooms and long, polished floors, revealing nothing out of the ordinary, at first. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light. Measured. Behind me. They weren't mine. I stopped walking, and they kept going, just for a second, then stopped too. I was standing beneath one of the dim emergency lights, and I turned around quickly, my heart thudding in my chest. But there was no one there. Just darkness stretching down the hallway, punctuated by the soft red glow of an exit sign far in the distance. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself it was just the building settling, or my own footsteps echoing weirdly. I pressed on. Room by room, I continued the loop, checking every space. A few of the smaller rooms were already unlocked and empty. No chairs out of place, no belongings left behind. Just the quiet, heavy dark. Eventually, I reached the last bathroom on the circuit. I opened the door and stepped inside, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. No movement, no sound. It was empty. Finally, I exhaled. Whoever I saw, or thought I saw, was gone. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a shadow, a weird refraction from the emergency fixtures. I walked back into the hallway, letting the door slowly close behind me. The building was empty. It was time to lock up. I was heading toward the front of the building, almost relieved to be wrapping things up, when I heard them again. Footsteps. This time I didn't hesitate. I stopped dead in my tracks. I knew someone was behind me. The sound was too deliberate, too human. Not a creak, not an echo, not a draft. I turned fast, spinning toward the dim light at the end of the hallway. Just beyond the edge of it, half consumed by shadow, stood a figure. Still, watching. I called out, my voice louder now, firmer. You need to leave the building, now. But the way they stood there, rigid, unmoving, it made the hairs on my neck stand up. There was something off in their posture, something unnatural in the way they didn't flinch or respond. And then, without a word, they turned and ran. A sudden blur of motion, quiet but fast, disappearing into the darkness of the opposite corridor. I just stood there, frozen. My mind raced. I didn't know what to do. My job was to clean floors and lock up, not to chase people through unlit buildings during a blackout. Physically removing someone? Definitely not in my job description. I turned and continued toward the front doors, my heart pounding harder now. The plan was simple: get out and call campus police. Let them deal with whatever this was. But as I reached the lobby and approached the glass entrance, I stopped one last time. I turned around, and what I saw nearly made my blood run cold. About 20 feet back, in the thick, suffocating dark of the lobby, stood the silhouette again. This time, it was hiding, tucked just behind a half-open doorway, barely visible except for the faintest outline of black against black. I say silhouette because that's all it was, just a shape. No features, no eyes, no face, no body I could clearly make out. Just a suggestion of someone standing there, watching me, waiting. I didn't say a word. I didn't move closer. I didn't even breathe. I turned, opened the front doors, and stepped into the storm. Then I pulled out my phone and called campus police. A few officers arrived a short while later. I explained everything, led them back inside. They swept the building room by room, light by light. But there was no one there. Nothing. The place was empty. Again. Later that night, just when I thought the whole ordeal was over, I got a call. It was the campus police. They asked me to describe the person I'd seen, anything I could remember, height, clothing, face, any detail at all. But I couldn't. I told them the truth. I didn't see anything specific, just a figure, a shape in the dark. That's when they told me something that made my stomach drop. There was a killer in the area, someone dangerous, on the run. He'd been spotted earlier that evening by a local resident, not far from the edge of the college campus. The call ended, but I just stood there, phone still in my hand, a cold shiver crawling its way up my spine. I didn't sleep much that night, and after that, I didn't feel safe, not for a long time. Even going back to work after that felt different, like the shadows were a little darker, the silence a little too quiet. Because whoever that was in the building with me, they weren't supposed to be there, and they were never found.